Well, hello everyone. I'm Dr. David Ajibade, and welcome to Your Health in Your Hands. Remember, at the Brain and Body Foundation, if you guys have been watching us for any period of time, you know that our goal is to help kids, especially medically fragile kids, with brain disorders, sickle cell disease, genetic conditions. And we've been doing this for about going on 6 years now. And we've seen hundreds and hundreds of children, and we've really helped out lots. And the federal government obviously has taken notice, and they've helped. The federal government is backing us in what we're doing. But in this session, we want to talk about some of the things we've seen over these 6 years of working with kids, the errors that the parents are making. I mean, and it's not just about the parents, really. Sometimes it's just they didn't have access to medical intervention when they needed it. I have a very good friend who they did all the antenatal clinics. They took up the medications as prescribed. They attended everything. They did everything their doctor told them to do. But when it was time for the delivery of their first child, a girl, hospitals were on strike. And they waited and waited. The OBGYN wasn't around. The gynecologist, no, even the nurses weren't around. So they had to, rough it. They had to manage. And eventually the child came out with severe brain problems. And this is a child that they're going to have to live with for the rest of their lives. And of course, they love that child, but this could have been avoided. That's just one example. There are other examples in which the parents were just careless. They took the drugs they shouldn't have taken, or they were taking a lot of alcohol or smoking, and that caused damage to the growing child. In other cases, they did what their doctors told them to do. And maybe it didn't cause as much damage, but when the kid came out, there were things that, let's say, they just didn't turn out the way they should. So today I'm going to have on the show Dr. Albert Mensah. You're welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. David. We appreciate it.
And we've had you on before. And Dr. Albert Mensah is the founder and medical director of Mensah Medical. And just tell us a little bit remind us a little bit about yourself and what you do, sir.
Okay. Well, I'm actually the president and CEO of Mensah Medical. My partner's the medical director, so I always want to make sure we keep that clear.
Thank you. Thank you for correcting me.
Yes. We specialize in basically molecular medicine. It's other people would know it as biochemistry, but it's more than biochemistry. It's looking at the interactions between chemistry, anatomy, physiology, environment at a molecular level. We look at manipulating molecules and directing them and redirecting them into the right place to do the right thing at the right time. So molecular medicine is how we really like to term it. But in that same vein, the applications in our world, they're primarily what we would call psychiatric, or of the brain, neurological in some cases. But the real applicability is global, it's systemic. So it's not just about brain behavior, it's not just about gut, it's everything that is associated with any kind of chemistry and genetics as well. So a simple way of putting it is, I like to say we do comprehensive medicine.
I gotta say, this is going to be very new to some of our viewers for sure. I know they've heard let me talk about nutrition and all that, but you really take it to a whole new level. Obviously, because of your experience and your expertise, but the fact that you really measure the biochemical levels of certain things that most doctors simply don't measure, right?
That is absolutely correct. And that's the difference. We actually measure the levels of different elements in the system that are key. And then this is how we know what to correct, what to shift, what to augment, or what to actually tone down in some cases. And everybody is uniquely individual in that sense.
Which makes you uniquely right for this talk, for this our discussion. Because in this episode, we're talking about the first 1,000 days, from conception to about 2 or 3. I guess that's 2 years, right?
Correct.
Conception 9. But what is it now? Yeah, I think it's about 1,000 days, right? Yeah. So thank you for making it. All right. So let's start. Let's start with conception. We all know that the parents have to be relatively healthy to conceive a child. And if the child needs to be, and he needs to be healthy, I'm going to let you take over very soon, but I'm just kind of like giving some little overview here and there. Obviously, they have to be healthy. Obviously, there are certain chemicals or certain nutrients that have to be at a certain level for there to be normal development, especially of the brain, which of course we are particularly interested in. But going further down the line, there are also other things that they need to have in place, or the parents need to have in place. Can you just take us through that process? And I'm sure it's going to take longer than one episode, but let's at least start.
Well, what I'll do, I'll try not to make this too terribly complicated, really, for the entire audience. You're correct. To me, life is a miracle. If everyone knew how many little tiny pieces need to be in place consistently to have a child, you couldn't possibly imagine why we're even alive today.
Yeah.
One thing goes wrong in the system and huge problems can happen, especially early in conception. But to make life very simple. So when we look at fertility, for example, well, people will talk about for a man, what kind of things, foodstuffs maybe make you fertile or give you that energy, shall we say, genetic energy. And people say, well, go ahead and eat oysters, right? Go ahead and do this and this and this. Well, the simple point is that the ingredient in the oysters that provides virility for a man is zinc.
Right.
Zinc.
Right.
Now, here's the other side of the equation. If a woman doesn't have appropriately high levels of zinc, if she's carrying a male child at conception, she may lose that child.
Really?
The male child development requires a lot of zinc in order to determine in order to fulfill spermatogenesis, so the development of sperm within that sac. And the individuals who are low in zinc may lose that child. So if a woman miscarries, in particular males, if she has a sequence of not carrying babies through to term, and in particular males, it could be something as simple as a lack of zinc.
That is amazing.
And it's actually quite true. From the male side of the equation, it's one thing to produce the sperm, but when the sperm have done their job and there's conception, now it's within the realm of the female to be able to continue that process. Now that sounds very logical, but some of the pieces we did not know we were missing. We're all told about folic acid. So the mother takes folic acid before conception. She's taking folic acid once she conceives. But no one ever talked about zinc.
I'm hearing it for the first time.
And so the key here is that you must have appropriate levels of zinc if you're carrying a male child. Okay?
To what term? Throughout the 9 months? Or when is it most crucial?
Usually within the first trimester is most crucial.
First 3 months, okay.
In the first trimester, possibly even moving between first and second trimester.
Got it. And what levels will those be, for instance? What would be ideal?
An ideal level is what we would reference as 90. Okay, on testing. But see, nobody knows that because they don't test what we do. Okay. For a female, I would suggest that at least 50 milligrams of zinc be on board pre-pregnancy while you're trying to conceive, and then throughout the first trimester.
So for
now here's what's significant.
Sorry, just to be sure, the mother-to-be and the pregnant mother should be taking 50 milligrams a day. Is that what you're saying?
Preconception, absolutely. And then realistically, I said 50 milligrams for the first trimester, but realistically, I would say anywhere between 30 milligrams and 50 milligrams. She should really be tested. That would be optimal. When
Yeah.
the mother is tested, then we know exactly where she is. Now, we have to be very careful with nutrients because whatever the mother's taking, the baby gets.
Right.
Okay. And we don't want to create a problem in the developing child by
Right.
taking high levels of zinc
I
because
understand
that
that.
can actually create an anemia. Okay.
Inter-
Now, if a child is anemic in utero, we haven't even talked about this, but if a child is anemic in utero, what does that mean? They're not getting oxygen, which is counterproductive to the whole idea of the developing child in pregnancy.
Mhm.
So we have to be very, very cautious. So let's talk about pre-pregnancy. Pre-pregnancy, before conception, 50 milligrams of zinc is a good idea. As soon as someone knows that they are pregnant, however, that should stop and maybe go down to a very low dosage of zinc,
I see.
maybe about 15 milligrams, okay,
I
one
see.
5 milligrams. Okay.
I see. I see.
But
Thank you.
even in
Thank you
our,
for pointing that out, Doc. Because I mean, like you and I have gone back, and you've warned me over and over again. So I'm going to be saying out for everybody that you've warned me to be careful. But I'm always conscious of the fact that most of our viewers and many, if not most patients who are watching this will probably not have the ability to have those minute by minute tests and day to day accurate testings. So I'm always looking for the lowest, safest possible amount that you can give to a patient and they can say, okay, I'm doing the right thing, other than not doing anything at all, because we don't want that either. That's what
correct,
I'm, yeah.
correct. That's why even during this conversation, I had to revise a few things because as we're moving through the different processes, the different stages,
Mhm.
then there's greater accessibility and greater potential challenge, even for the baby, from nutrients. That's
Got it.
why one never takes nutrients, especially high dosage nutrients, on their own, on your own, without having physician guidance.
Got
Okay.
it. Yes.
We talk about folic acid to prevent neural tube defects
Hmm.
before pregnancy and in the first trimester. Now, here's the thing, it's what we didn't know that became problematic. We began to say, well, you know, if folic acid is good to prevent neural tube defects in the first trimester, or maybe continuing folic acid for the second trimester is a good idea. Well, then it became, well, maybe continuing it for the full pregnancy and then continuing it after pregnancy. And do you know what, Dr. David? The incidence of attention deficit disorder, or ADHD, as well as the rates of autism, all began to rise. When you and I were growing up, we never heard of autism. We
That's
never
true.
heard of ADHD.
Not even
But
medical
we,
school.
we know these two conditions to be under methylated conditions. And folic acid, while in the one part of the cell, the cytoplasm, it's a great, powerful methylating agent. But then it dives into the nucleus of the cell and becomes a demethylating agent.
Wow.
In our immortal ignorance as physicians, we made assumptions that indirectly have likely led to this increase in ADHD as
Hmm.
well as autism. We
I
have
see.
created under-methylated infants because of the extreme use of the wrong nutrients for too long during pregnancy and beyond.
Hmm.
So this is why we talk about the power of nutrients. Nutrients are not benign. You and I were both taught in medical school that nutrients made no difference. We were both
Yeah.
taught that it's nothing. You don't use it for treatment. It's just for food.
That's why it's called supplement.
Correct. These are primary meds, not supplements.
Mhm.
This is how our systems work. This is
Mhm.
like saying the fuel for your car is insignificant. You try driving on less than 1/10 of a gallon of gas for 30 miles and see what happens in your car.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So we have to reorient our thinking.
But this is huge,
But
doc.
right
This
now,
acid thing
because
is
of this,
yeah,
absolutely.
it
So
is
our recommendations at Mensa Medical is that after the first trimester, you stop the folic acid.
completely.
Stop it. Absolutely. Just ensure that you have been in development at least 3 months. So oftentimes we'll say, listen, once you find out your pregnancy, go 4 months.
Okay.
Then we know for sure. that you are indeed pregnant, you've gone through the first trimester, then you can stop the folic acid. That's our recommendation.
Okay.
Because we've seen way too much and we've made these connections. More than 20 years ago, we've been saying this. But now, if you look at multivitamins, there are a few companies who've gotten wind of this and they've stopped adding folic acid to their multivitamins. Or they're making them in stages now for the first trimester, then after the first trimester. And actually, that was our idea. Okay. So
Interesting.
we have to be very, very careful about some of these things. Okay.
So I would be hallucinating. I mean, I could hallucinate that in many developing countries, our doctors don't know this.
In many developed countries, our doctors don't know this. In fact, it may have been the developed countries that created the most harm because we made assumptions that are not scientifically sound based upon the evidence some 20, 30 years later.
All right. So you do have evidence. I know we've talked about this before, but any OBGYN is going to say, well, that doesn't make sense. It's a bunch of whatever. This is not how we're taught. If you were to tell them where to go, where should they go to?
Here's what. Let's talk to anyone who's skeptical about what we just said.
Yeah.
Was there ever any evidence that folic acid beyond the first trimester was necessary?
No one. I guess no one has really checked that.
No.
We all.
Comment, Dr. David. At what point in time is the human brain vulnerable in development?
Well, the first trimester for sure.
First trimester. So what do you need to do to protect the brain up to the first trimester? Your folic acid.
Amongst other things.
But if the brain is only vulnerable up until the first trimester, then why would you need folic acid beyond the first trimester?
Okay, but do we know? But don't we know that? I would think the brain is vulnerable throughout.
No, sir.
Pregnancy.
Development. Neural tube. Once the neural tube is formed, nothing is going to happen to it.
Okay.
Right? The whole point to folic acid was the development of neural tube and the prevention of neural tube challenges or deficits.
Okay.
There is there's no problem with regard to neural tube defects after the first trimester. Okay? So you don't need to give folic acid to stop neural tube defects because the neural tube is already formed. It's done. That's science. That's science. Okay, so it's like saying, well, if you produce your car, then going through the production process is necessary again and again and again and again, but your car is already made. What I said didn't even make any sense, okay? Just now with the car example. That's like saying you're trying to prevent neural tube defects. The brain is now fully developed, but you're still trying to prevent neural tube defects by taking more folic acid. No, the brain is done.
Okay, so it's about the neural tube formation. Correct. However, the brain does continue to develop throughout pregnancy and it still needs support.
But who says folic acid is that support?
Exactly. Okay, so it's not about the folic acid again.
It's not about the folic acid.
Got it.
No.
Okay.
There are many other nutrient elements that are key at that particular point in time.
Got it.
Many other elements that are key.
Yes. Let's talk about some of those other ones.
Let's talk about that for one moment. Okay. So antioxidants.
Right.
Protecting the brain against oxidative stress. Very, very key. That's where your vitamin C comes into play. That's where your vitamin D comes into play. That's where your zinc comes into play. You know the antioxidants that are out and available. Nature provided them, the fruits, the vegetables. Right. All these things contain antioxidants that when the mother eats them can be very protective to help the brain and development of the developing infant, embryo, fetus. Okay. Folic acid is not that. Okay. So we started by asking the question, someone says, well, that doesn't make any sense and so forth. I said, have you actually thought about it? Go back to basic science, not you, doctor, but in general, doctor, whoever you are, and ask yourself, You were taught folic acid was necessary for this.
Mhm.
You were never taught anywhere that folic acid was necessary beyond this.
That's correct.
Okay?
That's
So
correct.
we then had to make an assumption. Since we were never taught that, we then assumed it without any actual scientific evidence or data that it was necessary.
All right, that makes sense. Now, the question an intelligent doctor would ask is, well, okay, so where's the data that shows that it is detrimental beyond
Ah,
its era 2 form?
wonderful. I'm glad we asked that question because we came to find out what methylation truly is
Okay.
and what folic acid does as it strips you of methyl. So what is a methyl molecule? A methyl molecule is that which activates and regulates enzymes, hormones, and neurotransmitters.
Hmm.
You need a process of attachment of a methyl molecule to any one of those agents we just talked about, and then they get removed. But when they attach, they activate, they set things in motion. I'm going to give you one very simple example. Let's go back to pregnancy and gestation. When the sperm and the egg come together and they fuse and you get your zygote, okay? Before the first cellular division, there's a process that happens. Before the first cellular division, turning that one cell into two, you add one methyl molecule to the system, one methyl molecule leaves, and another molecule gets re-added, okay? You add one, remove one, and add another. Before the first cellular division, that process happens 12 million times within a fraction of a second. 12 million times. That's 24 million methyl are needed to be added to that situation. But you lose 12 million at the same time before the first cellular division. So if methyl molecules activate and inactivate, if they control systems of development within the cell, and now you have an agent that is inappropriately removing methyl molecules, what are you doing to the system?
You're offsetting the balance.
Correct. Okay, that's point number one. So now let's move beyond this concept of the first second. Now we're past the first trimester. Okay. Now, some people are naturally what we call low in methyl. They're undermethylated. Some people are naturally high in methyl. They're over methylated. Both are problems. Okay. Now, usually there's a balance between 60% undermethylated individuals and 40% overmethylated individuals. But in the last 20 years, we've seen an extreme rise in undermethylated conditions, including schizophrenia. You used to be able to find X percentage undermethylated schizophrenia, X percentage overmethylated schizophrenia, but now it's in the other direction. It too is predominantly an undermethylated phenomenon now. It wasn't like that 20 years ago. So we have the rise. If you graph this is what our doctors love to do. Create a graph. Look from pregnancy and infancy all the way through to adulthood. Look at all the conditions that people like us are aware of that involve methylation. Autism, ADHD, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. And then look at what the chemistries are for these individuals. You'll see that they're all undermethylated predominantly now.
Interesting.
They rise all along the same slope, doctor. So now you have to ask the question, what are the potential causes of this? What can affect methyl? And it's like an elephant in the room. It's folic acid. Now, after having said all that, Johns Hopkins University did a study that showed that individuals who are autistic, Johns Hopkins in the United States, Johns Hopkins did a study that concluded by saying that high levels or prolonged use of folic acid may contribute to autism.
No way. Really?
Look it up.
We need iron.
Now, that was almost 10 years after we said this publicly.
Really? So why hasn't this affected the management of pregnant women then? Why
Well, not
hasn't
that you know. Today's research, how long does it take to get into medical school?
that? Yeah,
We
I
joke,
remember
but you know
vitamin C
anywhere, from 5 decades
to
to a
100 years.
century.
Yeah. Vitamin C was
Yeah.
like a century, wasn't it?
Pardon?
Vitamin C. Wasn't that like a century before it
Indeed.
got into
Yes.
clinical practice? Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people were still skeptical.
They still are. Yes. Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, anything in medicine, when you have the discovery, it takes a long time before it gets into schools, and then it takes even longer in order to get to this thing, to practice, right? So
Right.
even with the age of the internet, now we have another explosion of information, and people still aren't certain what is true and what is not true.
Right.
Okay, because
Right.
of all this new data that's coming out. Okay, but to me, this is very simple. What did you do differently during gestation as a practitioner before all of this happened? And what are you doing now? Folic acid.
Interesting. Okay, we're going to have to take a short break here, but I want to say this, folks. You don't have to wait until you hear this. He's not asking you to add anything else. He's basically saying this: after your third or fourth month of pregnancy, you want to step back from the folic acid. It may, uh, as you've seen the argument, you've seen the reasoning. It is not going to harm your child if you take it away, and there are other things too that you can add to, like it's mentioned. So please, you don't have to wait until you get the permission. You can step back on your folic acid for the sake of your child. We'll take a break now, and we'll be right back. This is gonna be huge. All right, welcome back, and we've had having a very thought-provoking discussion with Dr. Albert Mensah, and we are talking about the things that you need, your child needs the first 1,000 days, the most critical time of a human being's life, in my opinion, at those first 1,000 days. And unfortunately, too much of the time, we get it, many of us get it wrong. So we're here to really say, okay, look at the different parts of the child's, the pregnancy, birth, that neonatal period, and what is needed and what isn't needed nutrition wise. So, Doc, we've talked extensively about um, folic acid and zinc and vitamin D and vitamin C. You want to quickly wrap up on that before we move on
Yeah,
into the first?
I do want to clarify one thing. Now, when I say stop the folic acid, I don't truly mean take no folic acid.
Okay.
If you look at the dosages for prevention usually originate around 400 micrograms. Okay.
Okay.
That is a high amount of folic acid. Okay. You can go all the way down to something very, very small and basic, like 15, 20 micrograms of folic acid. Okay. I'm not saying
What does
stop
that
it.
relate to? I think it's pretty standard what they give in the maternity and the antenatal clinic. What is that? What do they normally give them? Is that 400
It's normally
micrograms?
about 400 micrograms, but people have gone between 600 and 800 micrograms
Okay.
in some preparations.
Okay.
That's a problem because 800 micrograms is what we use to treat adults. And you're giving this to a child in utero. That's like saying you're using an entire building and collapsing it in order to kill a fly.
Yeah.
Okay. It's tremendously powerful, tremendously powerful. So even if you say you can't find a smaller dosage, and you take that one folic acid in a multivitamin, all right, you don't need to take it again for another 4 or 5 days, put it that way.
I
Okay.
see.
That will allow the folic acid concentration to decrease. Okay.
Got it.
So that's one modification we may want to make. All right.
Okay.
So when we're looking at that, there are those nutrient elements that a mother should do well to have. And we talked about them: vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, in decent dosages. Now, in a typical world, if you've got a great diet and great capacity to have fruits and vegetables, that's one thing. Okay. But we
That's
know
5 to 9 servings, Doc. 5 to 9 servings. That's
indeed,
yeah, that's
indeed.
what it's required.
But come on now, on the continent, we're speaking for people who don't know the African continent, uh, tubers, carbohydrates, meat,
Yeah.
not a lot of vegetables necessarily,
Yeah.
okay, in the diet, in the dietary regimen.
Exactly.
So here we must talk about supplementation. But after that, so what do? You've delivered your baby, now what? Okay.
Mhm.
Well, a lot of the health that the baby needs comes from the mother's milk.
Mhm.
Everything from antibodies to actually elements. Whatever the mother eats, the baby gets. Whatever the mother drinks, the baby gets. So it would be very useful to at least be on some level of some type of a general multivitamin, devoid of folic acid, though. Devoid of folic acid.
No folic acid. Okay.
No folic acid. Get the folic acid from the diet. And the diet is in the form of dark green leafy vegetables. That's
Okay.
where you find your highest sources of folic acid. But you don't have it in such concentration that it wreaks havoc on the developing child. That's the difference.
Got it.
So there's nutrition and then there's medicine. People don't realize high concentration of nutrients is medicine.
Mhm.
Medicine is for healing. You are made of these nutrients. That's what your body is composed of. Now,
Mhm.
some are missing that are required. That's called fuel. That's the gasoline for the car. Your car
Mhm.
doesn't come with gasoline. You have to go buy it and put it in.
Mhm.
As vehicles, we don't come with high levels of zinc or with these other elements. We have to eat. That's what food is. Food is our external source that has to be put into the body. But now, if you create a synthetic food that is a vitamin or a nutrient, and now you're putting in extremely high levels, that takes your system into a different functionality, one that
Mhm.
can be detrimental. But yes, keeping a good balance of everything you've been told throughout your life already, the vitamin C's, the vitamin D's, the healthy things from produce and from plants and animals too, by the way. Very, very important. That takes me to something, Dr. David. So what's the common thinking around high fat foods?
They're bad.
Really?
That's
Why?
common thinking.
Ah, that's the common thinking.
That's
Why? Who
common
told
thinking.
us that?
Well, the diet, the doctors really.
Yes, and where did we get it? You know where we got it from?
No.
We got it from some man's concept that had no scientific data along those lines.
Not the Atkins diet.
Well, that's a different story.
Okay.
Atkins actually was talking about the fact for the need for fats in the diet.
His was need for fat. Okay, that was protein. Okay.
Let's talk about this for a moment because this is very important. You want to talk about developing children.
Yes.
What percentage of our brains are fat?
60% by dry weight, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So now, how often do you have cellular turnover in the human body?
Depending on the part of the body,
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
brain is the
But let's
slowest.
just say very simply every day, right?
Okay.
Cells are made of what kind of structure that surrounds the cell? What is it that separates a cell from the outside environment?
The cell membrane, which is made of a lot of fat.
Cell membrane
Yeah.
is made up of what?
Phospholipids. Lipids.
Phospholipids. Okay. So if you're turning over a cell and it's made of a lipid membrane, then you need to replace it. How do you replace a lipid membrane? How do you replace lipids in your system?
Um,
From the
Fat.
foods we eat.
Right.
They are the source. Fats are necessary for brain development. We have been told the wrong thing for a long time, and it became dictum in medical science. Oh, give your child fat-free milk. Are you kidding me?
Hmm.
Brain development requires fats. Give your children. Why is it that breast milk has a high fat concentration?
Right. Right.
Would nature put something in our women that would be detrimental to the development of the child they are carrying and having to feed?
Not at all. Not at
Doctor,
all.
we've woken up for a moment. We're actually thinking as opposed to being told things by nonsensical people that had no evidence in their
Yeah.
statements.
Yeah.
Any mother, human or otherwise, that's a mammal, that has milk that it gives to its young, is rich in fat. That's because the human brain requires fat, not 2% fat, not 2% milk, not 1% milk, not skim milk, actual full concentrations,
Right.
fat. So, my long story here, one of the most important things you can do once you develop that child, if you cannot breastfeed, make sure there's a good, high quality of fat consumption. I'm not talking about carbohydrates. Dr. Mensah did not say go eat pizza, okay? We're talking about good fats in the system. This was why the idea of red meat being bad for you was actually an erroneous concept. They would say because it's very fatty, there's a lot of fat in red meat. Well, of course, there's fat in red meat. Okay, fat has a purpose. And that same fat is what your body will break down in order to help you rebuild your cells in your system. And it's the fat in breast milk that takes care of the developing child as well.
So what if the mother can't, for whatever reason, can't breastfeed?
Mhm.
What are the options for the baby?
Well, once again, there are formulations out there in terms of milk that comes in some preparation. Okay.
Okay.
And those kinds of things can be given to the infant. And those preparations can contain more fat content. They can be developed if they're not there.
Okay.
Or
Okay.
if you are in a country that has things like cod liver oil, or that has things like, what's the one we use? Omega-3 fish oils.
Okay.
Omega-3 fish oils are very powerful. If your child doesn't have pyrrole disorder, they're very powerful. And if you cannot do the breast milk thing, as they say, then omega-3 fish oils, which are fatty and they're anti-inflammatory, they're a good resource. Okay, you just have to watch the dosage in an infant. That's a whole different story.
Well, I know this. I can attest to it because omega threes for a long time formed the foundation of a lot of what we were given to kids with some brain damage, specifically with cerebral palsy, and they
Correct.
worked wonders. Didn't know much about pyrrole disorders, but at least for cerebral palsy and other forms of brain damage at the time of birth was very helpful. So we know for a fact that helps. How
Indeed.
about how about eggs, Doc? So I mean, it used to be a time when
Beautiful.
the eggs were not a good idea, but now are they a good idea for early?
Oh, another one of our bad myths from ancient medical history.
Yes.
Eggs, one of the most complete foods anyone could consume.
Yeah.
Okay. There's another reason why cholesterol is in eggs. Cholesterol is the backbone upon which every single hormone the human body creates is
Every
made.
single one.
Every single hormone
Not
starts.
just the sex hormones.
Sorry?
Not just the sex hormones.
No, not just the sex hormones. Steroids, for example, they start with a cholesterol backbone.
Okay.
Okay? So our hormones themselves, you can't do a great job if you have no cholesterol.
Mhm.
Okay? Cholesterol does not cause heart attacks. Okay? Many individuals in an emergency room who have a heart attack have normal fat levels or normal lipid levels. They're not
That,
high.
that is
Okay?
interesting. Where do we get that?
Absolutely. These are United States statistics.
Hmm.
Okay? So it's not the fat that is causing people to have heart attacks. There are other factors that come into play. Now, I'm not talking about obesity. This is different. I'm
Right.
talking about the simple concentration of fat in the foods themselves is not the key factor. There's activity, there's all sorts of other things. Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
So when you're looking at these discussions about things like eggs and certain types of foods, well, the cholesterol is necessary. It's part of your system. Okay. You cannot get good hormone development, good steroid development without cholesterol backbone.
Mhm.
Okay? That's the foundation.
Okay.
So now two myths, fat and cholesterol. So now when you talk about eggs, it's got protein, it's got cholesterol, it's got fat. Three very, very basic pieces for your system to survive on. Very
So,
much.
so would that be something that you would like? Is a general rule of thumb, which is revealing, really. Rule of thumb: if the child can't take breast milk or his diet is suboptimal, is there eggs? Can we give a lot of eggs?
Well,
Few.
no, until a child has teeth and can chew and swallow, we're not going to do those things.
They can crush it. They can crush the eggs up. They can boil
They'll
and crush.
often, they'll often try that. And it's not a bad thought, quite honestly, but still, even crushing it, there's still particulate matter. There's still particles if
Okay.
you've cooked an egg, okay? And you can't give a raw egg to children. So this is really for children who are able to eat, okay, and they have teeth. Aside from that, then we have to go to different preparations that may be powders that you blend that now contain some level of certain type of fats, things like that, and milk, some formulation of milk that you give the child. Okay.
Got it.
But the key here is that the milk should not be fat-free. The milk should not be skim milk. And of course, it should be as organic as possible. Okay.
Is there any other thing with milk that you want to emphasize? I know you've mentioned emphasize fat and cholesterol. Are there any minerals? I know polysaccharides, the fiber that's in milk is helpful as well. But let me hear your thoughts on what else is in milk, in human milk that's for some reason they may not be getting enough of, and you want to ensure that parents understand that this is what's important in it.
Actually, I think focusing on these particular keys is very significant. Okay. I'm not worried as much about polysaccharides and things because what we want to look at are the key elements.
Okay.
Key elements that we know, if they're deficient, create problems. There are always secondary and tertiary adjunctive elements that can be, useful. But if they're not there, does the building structure crumble? Okay. You don't have fats. You can't properly myelinate nerve cells, right?
Right.
So how many nerves are in the human brain? 800 million nerves are in the human brain. Each nerve allows electricity to flow through and around it. The only way a nerve can do that, if you take away the fat layer from a nerve, electricity moves slower, right? When you have your fat layer, which is made of cholesterol, right, Dr. David?
Right.
Electricity moves very quickly. So for proper brain processing, you have to have that layer of fat around the nerves themselves.
Right.
No fat, slow conduction, slow electrical movement, slower processing, hindered brain development. Okay? Times 800 million nerve cells. Okay?
Yeah.
So forget all the science. Let's just think logically. Knowing a few key points. If fat is wrapped around a nerve cell and you need a nerve cell to communicate to another nerve cell quickly, and you have 800 million of them in the human brain, what point don't you simply say you need fat?
Yes.
Or that fat is bad for you?
Yeah.
Really? If it's so bad, then why is it so necessary for our human brains to work? Why?
I guess part of the argument would be that, well, they see in blood when when people take a lot of fast food and all that stuff. But you've addressed that. I mean, sometimes they check the blood and it seems a little foggy and because of the high fat content.
Now, again, we're not talking about obesity.
Yeah.
We're not talking about the typical Western diets that are high in really, really bad foods that are highly inflammatory, by the way, okay? We're not talking about cheese and bread and things like that and secondary fat levels. And we're not talking about those things. We're talking about just the idea, the concept of what fat and cholesterol really are, and that they are indeed a necessary part of a healthy human system and a necessary part of development, okay? You know what happens when you start to lose the fat around a nerve? There's a disease.
Multiple sclerosis.
Multiple sclerosis. Now, many people have heard the term MS, but do they realize the problem begins to happen because you are losing the myelination or the fat around the nerve?
Right.
So now let's visit this problem again. Is fat actually bad for you?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
Yes.
Okay. So all my long-windedness to say, before pregnancy, certain nutrients are important to an extent, and then they should stop. After pregnancy, this idea, this myth of skim milk and fat-free milk and all that other stuff should be stopped immediately. Give your children normal milk when it comes to the any kind of substitute for breast milk. Milk when the kids are now 2, 3, 4 years of age and not breastfeeding anymore, but they're still drinking milk. They need fat-filled milk, not fat-free milk. Okay, that's extremely important. Now it's different when they're 15, 16 years of age. That's a different story. But this idea of skim milk needs to be stopped in early development of children.
Got it. Well, we don't have skim milk in Nigeria, so we don't have to worry about that. I don't think we do anyway. We don't
That's a good thing.
But
milk. Many of our so-called Western countries, however, you enjoy that. That's an adult concept, not a child concept.
Child concept, right. Yeah, I'm sure the bourgeois in Nigeria who have access to the big Walmart-like stores would probably have access to it, but for the most part, they don't. But again, many times people in the lower middle class tend just to not be careful enough about what kind of foods. And I always try to emphasize that you need to spend and sacrifice as much as possible now within these first few years of life so you can set your kid up for for the rest of his or her life. And you don't want to start scrimping now. You need to ensure that he or she gets the best form of nutrition possible. So that's why I appreciate you're bringing up all these things like zinc and folic acid for the first 4 months. And let's go over them again, Doc, so we can just round it up so people are clear about what we're talking about.
So let's be absolutely clear.
Yeah.
We're not saying that folic acid is not important. Quite the opposite.
Yeah.
It is extremely important in development.
Yeah.
Before you're pregnant, and just to make sure dates are clear, for at least 4 months once you find out you're pregnant.
Okay.
After that, folic acid should be stopped. Okay.
Because you had stopped, but then we kind of backtracked a little bit and said,
correct.
Okay, is it multivitamins or something?
Those dosages should not exist. The prenatal vitamin dosages should not be given to any pregnant mother after the first 4 months.
Okay.
So if you take a prenatal vitamin again after your 4 months in development, maybe you take it just once a week or once every week and a half. Okay, because that will give the opportunity for these dosages to dwindle, so you don't have so much of an effect building up in your system. Nutrients can build up in your system. Okay?
And the danger with folic acid is that if you take it for too high a dose for too long, it can result in undermethylation problems such as ADD, ADHD, and autism.
And autism, yes, absolutely. It can also predispose you for schizophrenia susceptibility later on in life.
It won't cause it. It can just predispose you so that if the circumstances.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
So there's a lot of, now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying schizophrenia is only caused by folic acid, not at all. There's a multitude of symptoms or circumstances that come together to create that phenomenon. What I am sharing is that what we know is that people who are not designed to be one way can be artificially affected by nutrients to produce a different version of the way they were truly designed. And that version is a more susceptible version than the original picture, the original creation.
Got it. All right. So folic acid, where you talked about other things like vitamin C and vitamin D and zinc, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes. Okay. Now,
said,
the beauty is that when you're taking a multivitamin, the zinc and such is in such low quantities that it's not a problem. So in a multivitamin, zinc levels are not a problem at all. Okay.
But before she's pregnant, she needs to be having 50 milligrams around, which is not available in multivitamin tablets.
Correct. So higher dosages, and these things always would be discussed with your doctor before you take them. Let's make sure we have that caveat very clear.
Very
And
good.
feel free to ask Dr. David what the appropriate dosages will be, because he and I will be talking anyway.
Absolutely.
So,
And like we said before, folks, you can always reach out to us. You have the social media platforms and the website, so you can get with my staff and they will connect us if you need to talk to us. So, so Doc, yes, we're going to have to round up very soon, but
worries.
that's, this has been fantastic. So at least we're bringing out and emphasizing some things that parents need to know about, especially mothers, right? So I
Absolutely.
like what you said about fats too and cholesterol, because that's really important. Yeah.
Well, we know, given our stews and our soups and all those
Yeah.
wonderful things that you can literally see the fatty
Oil.
layer,
Yeah. Full of oil.
um, those aren't the detrimental pieces necessarily. Okay. It becomes a matter of how much, how often, and how much exercise, how much movement do you have?
Right.
All those things come into play.
And I think it's really important to just the fact that we have
Okay.
someone who's actually measuring these things and seeing the data and seeing the research and saying, okay, this is what you can do and this is what you shouldn't do. So I think that's super important.
Absolutely, doctor. And then, even more important, doing the research is one thing, seeing it
Mhm.
clinically is another thing, but sharing that information
Oh
so
yeah.
that we are now aware as a global community. That's the most important thing.
Right.
That's the most important thing.
Right. Whew, we could go on forever.
Indeed, indeed. So much to do, so much to learn, so much to share.
So little time. So, Dr. Mensah, thank you so much, folks. You've been listening to the Master at Work, Dr. Mensah of
Uh,
Mensah. And we definitely will be hearing from him many more times in the future. So, thank you, sir, so much.
Dr. David, always a pleasure. Thank you. May you and your patients and everyone be well.
Thank you. Thank you. So, folks, there you have it. Please stay healthy, stay strong. Your health is in your hands, so you got to take control of it. So, God bless. Remember, these videos are archived on the website, brainandbodyfoundation.org, free for you to access. And if you have to get a hold of us, you know how to do that. If you need help for your kids with brain disorders, sickle cell disease, again, reach out to us. We ship to all over the country, all 36 states. You just have to pay for shipping, but the supplements and the medications are free. So don't make sure you take avail yourself of that. So God bless, stay strong, and we'll see you soon.